We're at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis for a dialogue with Julia Reichert. Tonight's program is entitled Julia Reichert, 50 Years in Film. I will talk with Julia about her remarkable career in film. Julia Reichert isn't often visible in her films, but she is always present. She'll show up on screen from time to time, and occasionally she'll chime in via voiceover. But hers isn't a cinema in which the director doubles as a character. Rather, her character, the moral kind, informs every decision, every interaction, every long and hard-fought development of her work. If there's something or someone to be understood, she's in pursuit and paying attention. A living master of observational filmmaking, Reichert's cinema asserts that observation needn't imply lack of participation. It's a cinema of attending to what matters, of attendance as assertion of what matters. There are crucial threads through the director's dozen-plus films, abiding concerns for women, working people, and humanity in the face of dehumanizing systems. But they're bound by Reichert's curiosity. A self-described working-class kid from southern New Jersey who, along with her siblings, became the first link in her family to attend college, Reichert sought knowledge at a time in American history, the mid-1960s, when everything was being challenged and rewritten. Tell me what I don't know is ever implicit in her work. Show me what your life is like motivates each camera placement. No matter how political or essayistic her ambitions, Reichert's films always exhibit a thoroughgoing, tactile humanity. I'm Eric Hynes, curator of film at Museum of the Moving Image. Now we'll begin our dialogue with Julia Reichert. So, Julia, you were out here last night for Growing Up Female. I don't know if how many were here. Great. Welcome back. So we showed Growing Up Female, and you talked beautifully afterwards. And you said something which is right in the zone of the first thing I wanted to ask about anyway.
Okay.
Which is you talked about how frustrated you were by the interviews that you've been conducting over the last year or so. And so here we are to have an interview. And I'd love to know, before I fail to measure up to your expectations, I'd love to know, I'd love to talk a little bit about the art of interviewing for you, because I think if you look over your work, you're an extraordinary interviewer. What was the first interview you remember conducting? Do you remember what that would have been for, the first time
It might have been actually, no, it wasn't for Growing Up Female, but those are some of the early ones. You know, I worked in radio first at WYSO Radio in Yellow Springs, Ohio, which is where I still live. So it probably was, you know, a local, you know, it probably was local women, because it was the early days of the women's movement. And I had a show called, it was first called The Single Girl, before I realized, like, wait a minute, girl? Aren't we trying to get past that? We're not chicks, we're not whatever, we're women. So then I changed the title after 3 months to Sisters, Brothers, Lovers, Listen, which was the name of a well-known poem at that time. So I probably did some interviewing of women at that point. But really, the Growing Up Female interviews were very extensive.
Yeah.
You know, back in the day, you know, with 16 millimeter film, it's not like now where you can just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. And everybody does now. We had about a 2-to-1 ratio because film is so expensive.
Right.
And we knew we couldn't just let the camera roll. So we did a huge amount of pre-interviewing with just a really good mic and a Nagra, good tape recorder, which we learned how to use on that film. And we just, the difference is, I really wanted to know for myself. You know, I wanted to know all these different people, all these different women, and their parents in some cases. Like, what were the lives of women like? What was the 34-year-old housewife's life like? What was the 12-year-old girl's life? What were her aspirations? What was her life? Did she have a boyfriend? Did she think about boys? It wasn't, nowadays, what people seem to do is to just say, bring up a topic and just say, talk about that.
Talk about it, yeah.
Talk about that, like as if you're talking for their article. You know, or you're talking for the microphone.
They're seeing paragraphs in their article, and they want you to fill that paragraph.
Yeah, it's not like they really care. And that's a big difference, I think, right? That's a big difference. If you Right, exactly. If you are actually curious, and it has to be based, which I think all the films that I've made or worked on are based on things that I am very curious about. I have an inner desire or need to know the answers to the questions, or to know that person, and to see what their human condition is at this point, right? Because we're all different, but yet we're all the same.
Right.
And so what is it like for that person, whether they're 6, 12, 34, whatever. So through talking with them, it was like sitting down and talking.
Right.
That was it.
You get that sense from the very beginning in growing up female. You get the sense that these conversations are going wherever the responses are is where they take the conversation. You're not forcing the conversation through.
No, not really. No, it's like, no. Because that's not what makes great films, is to have an idea, this is what we're going to say, and let's go out and prove it. You know what I mean? This is our idea, let's go out and prove it.
Some do approach filmmaking that way.
I know, I guess so, but why would you do that? Like, you spend years on movies.
Right.
You spend years. You spend all of yourself, you and the people. You ask for favors from everybody in your life. So why would you do that if you were just trying to prove something you already knew?
Right.
You want to, every one of them, I know it sounds like maybe corny, but every one of them is like an exploration for me. It's like a true exploration. And that's what also, I always tell young filmmakers this, look, it has to matter to you. They say, what kind of film should I make? And I think they're thinking, what does Netflix want to buy?
Sure.
And I'm thinking, what matters to you? What is the story only you can tell? Right? What comes out of your life? Otherwise, it's too hard and you'll give up. It's too hard to make these films. So it has to matter, and they've all mattered to me hugely, to me personally. They're not about me, right? None of them. But I think I'm in them all. My phases of life are represented in the films. Like what I have gone through in life are a lot, represented in there. So anyway, that's a long answer to a short question.
Great, it's a great answer, and there's more. So Growing Up Female was in 1971.
We shot it in the spring of 70,
right,
over spring break, and it came out a year later, yeah.
So, I mean, and from the very beginning, you're a female filmmaker approaching what it's like to be a young woman, a girl growing up into womanhood. And I'm curious, from that very beginning, the challenges of being a female filmmaker and approaching folks to interview them. Is that something there's you being a curious person approaching filmmaking the way that you were from the very beginning. Did you have to adjust yourself depending on who you were talking to? Like what sort of responses were you getting from the men in that film in particular?
Yeah, because there are definitely men in that film. Yeah. Let's see, did I have to adjust myself? Is that what you mean?
I'm curious if there's who you are and then there's what you're getting in response to people. Did you have to start in that point, and then also maybe in the first several films, did you have to adjust your method of talking to folks, or were you just always yourself and you got what you got?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, I feel like it's not like I want to be like a blank slate or neutral. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, I have my own life, my own, partisan feelings and so forth. But I want to know, I really honestly want to know, it's not like I want to be neutral. I want to really know what that person feels, thinks, what keeps them up at night, what they fear, what nooks and crannies of their life have shaped who they are. I really want to know that. So that's the driving force, I think. Right. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
But your curiosity in some ways maybe cuts through whatever resistance they might have had.
Oh,
for
because
a young woman coming to them and asking these questions.
They can tell I actually am interested in them. I think that makes a big difference. I didn't go to the men and be kind of like, well, you're a man. Why are you treating your daughter like that? Or the guy who teaches computer science, pre-computer key punch. Mm-hmm. I didn't say, well, look how you're treating these women students. I would never do that. I mean, I felt that, but I just wanted to know, like, well, what are the challenges of being a teacher of both boys and girls? Which are harder to teach, in what way, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I just, you don't go in, I just think you try hard not to go in with an agenda, even if you have your own perspective. I don't think I knew that back then. Maybe I was just a polite kid. Maybe it's just I was very polite. I don't know. So
well, I know I guess you would describe yourself as polite, but you also describe yourself as kind of bookish, and you were, and a tomboy in many ways.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if before you were making films, you were somebody who asked a lot of questions too. Like when did it start? When did you, even further back from the first film? When did you start asking questions?
Oh yeah, I was always a big egghead and wanted to know everything. Like when we traveled, which luckily my dad was a union man, and I know you and I have talked. Eric and I know each other already. We've known each other for a while.
Not the first time,
yeah. Yeah, and we've talked about our backgrounds, and you come from a modest background, and so do I.
Right.
And I think growing up, none of us could have pictured we'd be here right now. I couldn't have, that's for sure.
It's impossible, yeah.
No, it would be like way out of reach. But my dad...
I didn't even know places like this existed when I grew up.
Well, I didn't either. Yeah. Well, they did it. I guess did the Walker exist in 1970? It did. Okay, thank you. I didn't know. So 1970 is when I graduated college. That's why I asked that. So in terms of, it's important to know, like we were a union family. We were a Republican family, but we were a union family.
Right.
My dad was a steward at one point. We went to the union banquet once a year, which my parents put on their fancy outfits and wore funny hats, and we all got to eat a big dinner around a table. Looking back, when seeing those pictures, I realized, those were the union banquets. I didn't even know it at the time quite. But anyway, because he was in a union, we got to go on vacations. Being a blue-collar person, blue-collar, middle-class person back then meant if you were union that you could own your house. You got a new car every few years, right? You got to go on vacation. You could buy stuff. We did collect S&H green stamps. I don't know if you remember those. You're too young,
I'm
right?
too young for that, but
some
folks in the audience know
those.
what that is.
S&H green stamps, and we'd put them in the books and go and get like golf balls or I don't know, weird stuff. So you don't know about that. Okay. Anyway, we didn't play golf, but you might afford golf. So we traveled a lot. My dad loved to travel. So we went to Mexico, we went to Canada, we went to all the world's fairs. And that was, actually my dad asked a lot of questions and I asked a lot of questions. And I always read the guidebooks and I always read maps. I love maps. I was the only person in my family like that who, I don't know, I was just an egghead. I don't know why. I got glasses when I was 10. So I was 4 eyes.
Right.
Back then, not that many people wore glasses. So I was a little bit socially isolated, I guess. Anyway, maybe that's a good thing.
Well, it's just interesting because, I think it's really crucial because there's stories that folks may have in terms of becoming filmmakers where they went to film school or, there was a certain pathway that they were curious or they voraciously watched movies at the age of 10 or something like that. But the notion of coming from a working class background, but asking questions from early age, exploring. You wouldn't think that the sort of biographies of your parents that you would have been people who've been exploring so much, but you were. And that seems so important to...
I think it was partly nature that we lived in a fairly rural area and we went every summer to the shore. So I wanted to learn all about fish and clams and stars and birds. My dad, we didn't have any books in the house at all or pictures, but at his grocery store, he was a butcher. There were these little pocket books, I don't know if they still have them, like one would be birds, one would be the stars, and he would bring those home to me.
And they were kind of like the rotating display in the...
Probably, I don't know if I remember seeing them, but they were just these little books, color, and you'd read through, and those were the books in the house. Mm-hmm. That and Reader's Digest, we did have that, and I loved Reader's Digest.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't know why, but I was just very questioning and wanted to learn about the world, and my head was always filled. I also couldn't sleep. I was an insomniac, and I used to listen to the radio at night.
I was an insomniac too.
You were? See, we never talked about that.
Anyway, but you were an insomniac, so you listened to the radio at night.
Yeah, I turned the radio on. I always shared a room with one of my brothers until I went to college. Till I was 18, I shared a room with, not only a room, but a bed.
Wow.
A double bed with my brother. But we listened to, oh God, what was that late night guy who was so amazing? Gene Shepherd. Thank you, Steve. Gene Shepherd out of New York City. And he told these weird stories and played weird music. That and Mad Magazine, right? We're like the window, right? Mad Magazine, Gene Shepherd, we're like, that there was another world out there. There were these weird people out there. It was way before the 60s, which, but I think all those things.
Well, I want to talk, for those of us who were here and saw your incredible talk about growing up female, I don't want to cover all that same ground.
Of course, no.
So we're not going to watch a clip from that film, but I do want to get us there, which is, I'm curious, so you told the story about going to Antioch.
Antioch College, yeah.
So I know that you went from New Jersey, southern New Jersey, to Antioch in Ohio. In a sense, you haven't left, and I'm curious. No. And I'm curious about that move, and because I'd love to move forward in your filmography, but it's interesting how that's a major thread about that area of Ohio, and so I'm curious about what anchored you there.
Oh well, first of all, Antioch College definitely changed my life. There's no question about it. That whole sense of like, you can do anything. You can do it yourself, and you go out on jobs all over the country and you see the world. I think ending up in Dayton, which I did for many decades, it was before we moved back to Yellow Springs, that came about because all of our kind of lefty friends were basically moving to either Cambridge, New York City, Berkeley. They were going to all those comfortable spots for lefties. And so we sort of felt, we were young, we lived in a commune, and all that. Young people discovering, the Black Power movement and the anti-war movement, the women's movement and all that. We said, there got to be some of us who stay here, in the Midwest. Yeah. And actually there already was a movement there, which we hooked up with and we got to know. There was an underground newspaper, there was the radio station. So we just stayed, and it wasn't like we planned to stay there for the rest of our lives, but we did. And it's turned out to be, in the long run, a really good thing because there are so few voices from the Midwest that are indigenous or that are authentically, let's say, from the Midwest. And yet there are stories everywhere. There are important stories everywhere that we have that kind of unique access to because we live there. I mean, if you look at almost every one of the films is based in and around Dayton, Ohio. The only one that's, as I recall, that's not is Seeing Red, which we actually started in Ohio. I think we're going to see that later, and the first person who speaks is in Ohio. But that became a national film because it was a national movement. Right.
But even that started, you thought you were starting?
Started in Ohio, yeah. I think it's like, of course I have a ton of friends in New York, you among them, and LA and San Francisco. But getting to know, nothing against them. I think it's great that people, for instance, like go to Afghanistan to make a film, or go to Central America to make a film. And a lot of our friends have done that, but I don't know why. We just wanted to make films about people we knew and situations we knew really well. And I think that's an advantage. And also, when we have like test screenings or the people we kind of circulate with, a test screening will be like a school teacher, a person who works at the post office, a nurse, somebody who might work at a factory or a plant nearby. So they're not filmmakers. Do you know what I mean? They're not filmmakers giving us feedback on our work. Right. They're just the people we want to have in our audience. So I think it's, there were many times when it was like, we didn't know what was, like everybody knew about all the funding sources in New York and LA, We didn't know about any of that. People knew the reporters. People knew the wealthy people. We didn't know any of that. This is way, way, way before the internet. I mean, long distance calls were expensive, right? You all remember that. Like, picking up the phone to call New York, you had to think about it. And driving to New York, you might go once every few years, right? We didn't fly, it was way too expensive. So there was a long period where you felt sort of isolated, but in looking back, now that I'm 73, looking back, I feel like that helped us, me and Jim certainly, for all those like 20 years we were together, gain the kind of confidence in our own work that, like, even though the work was all made in Dayton, Ohio, without the help of outside filmmakers in general, that it went somewhere. It got shown in movie theaters or it got shown on television. It gives you the confidence to be an independent, like to believe in yourself. Believe in yourself and not hit the mic. Okay.
Well, you mentioned Jim. So Jim Klein.
Jim Klein, yeah.
Who the first 4 films you directed with. And we're going to see a clip from Methadone, American Way of Dealing.
Okay.
But maybe you want to say just a few words about, you mentioned again last night a little bit about how you met each other, but I'm curious about the working method that you had together from Growing Up Female that led to the clip we're about to see, or the film behind the clip we're about to see.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy and I, of course, fell in love and lived together, and we eventually had our daughter together, Leela, who now is the mother of our grandchildren. Jimmy is one of my very best friends. He lives 2 blocks from our house. It all eventually worked out. It was hard at the beginning when we broke up. Jim and I, we each brought different things to the table in our work. We were like inseparable, so we of course were going to work together. He was interested in film. He was interested in radio. He got me interested in radio. I was a photographer. Actually, he never really became a photographer, but okay. So we put that together, but we were really interested in like learning how to use a Nagra, how to use a camera, all that stuff. And I could give you a very long story of how we ended up making the Methadone film, but it didn't start out to be the Methadone film. I'll just give you a real short version. Of course, we were in the New Left, and we wanted to make films that had an impact on the world, just like we saw Growing Up Female had a huge impact on the world. We wanted to make a film about women in prison. And we actually started working on it, women in crime, and we actually filmed a fair amount. We came to New York City for a while. But what we started realizing in talking to these folks, women who were out of prison, we started asking, well, why did you end up in prison? What happened? What was the deal? And almost every one of them, it had to do with being an addict. And how did you get to be an addict? How did that happen? Well, it was my boyfriend. It was my husband. It was the guys on the block. It was a lot. So it was women getting involved in drugs through men. So, but how are you going to get off drugs? How do you get off drugs? Well, methadone. So one line of questioning of many, many people led us to realize the real issue is the drug problem in the US. And there seemed to be a real conflict about how to deal with it, just like there is now. It was a different phase of the drug wars, right, or the heroin addiction, the early phase in the 70s, the early 70s. So we ended up deciding to make that was the more important film to make. So that's how we got to make Methadone. Jimmy always took sound. I always did the interviews. We worked on our questions together. But, and in that case, Methadone, if we're going to look at a clip of that, I would say, from our experience with Growing Up Female, where we had a male cameraman, and you remember we talked about how he would shoot people like this? Right. And he shot the woman who didn't wear a bra, like he kept shooting in different angles at her, trying to get in what was going on in her shirt, It's like never again would we have a male cameraman. And also, And also I realized I had to look through the lens to see what was being shot. You know, because everybody looks terrible when you shoot them like this. So it was terrible. So Alicia Weber was our camera person. She had been an Antioch student with me. Alicia actually was the second woman in the whole country to get into the camera persons union, like years down the road. And she helped a lot of women get in. So I think she did a great job of shooting the film. And Jimmy and I edited together. Yeah, we pretty much edited that film together. We didn't start doing separate jobs until Union Maids, which we could talk about later.
So let's maybe start by looking at Methadone.
A little bit. Well, I don't know what you've chosen, but we'll see. Okay.
Methadone maintenance had some powerful supporters. Politicians and police, unable to deal with crime, jumped to methadone to cure the ills of urban America. The medical profession, eyeing big research grants and new jobs in the field of addiction, gave it their stamp of approval. And the drug companies, eager for profits from America's frustrations, went into full production of methadone. But was it the answer? Some called methadone treatment, while others said it was just another drug.
In the past, I think we've had very often just a filling station operation with some methadone programs where physicians were just passing out methadone and providing nothing else.
And that's not true.
This has now been eliminated with the new FDA regulations.
Dr. Bourne is Assistant Director of the White House Special Office for Drug Abuse, created by President Nixon to set drug policy for the entire country.
Any program that wants to continue to operate must provide comprehensive services with a complete range of rehabilitative programs.
We offer methadone maintenance on an outpatient basis, methadone detoxification, counseling, group therapy, individual psychotherapy.
We're addicted worse now than we were when we came in here.
You mean you think short-term junkies like you are going to suffer more?
Right, yeah, the short-term junkies are, yeah, but the
I
hard...
don't agree with you on that, man. This clinic is the best thing ever come to Dayton, Ohio, man. The best thing.
It helps them to the extent where they're not out there every day hustling, trying to make money.
I'd rather have a dope habit any day than have a methadone habit. But I'm going to tell you right to your face in the camera what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get me some stuff and get off this methadone. And then come back and drink it for a day and I'll be cool. You'll be better off taking methadone, cause the stuff they get ain't that good no more. Like, you're just giving your money away. I'd rather get the free action than to spend my money. All they have to do is come out here and take it detox for 30 days and go on back home.
You ever tried that?
They don't have to. I done did it many
How many times,
times.
all right, you did that. How many times have you been readmitted to this program?
Because I like to shoot dope. That's why. And every time...
You've been out and you come back into the clinic?
Yeah.
A number of times.
About 5 or 6.
Why don't you stay off?
Well, because I like to shoot dope. I'm going to be honest about it. I'm going to shoot it long as I can get it.
What I want to know is, how has methadone helped you?
It gives me a chance to get myself together after having a stuff habit for so long. It gives me a chance to get some clothes and get some more money and beat a couple of court cases and get my nerves back.
How long have you been shooting drugs?
Oh, about 7 years.
You've been shooting drugs for 7 years?
And this clinic been here 2. So the first 5 years was really hard, you know. So that's why I said this clinic is the best thing ever happened in Dayton, Ohio.
You just come here and take your drink. You get no therapy, no counseling, or nothing.
Well, how about him? How does he prove your point?
The only way he gets off of methadone is to shoot heroin. The only way he gets off of heroin is to take methadone. He's going in a vicious circle. He's never going to be drug-free.
And it may take as much as 6 months or a year to completely change his lifestyle to one that's stabilized, that's free from the use of heroin, and where he perhaps has a job and is productive, is no longer involved in criminal activity, and has a gratifying relationship with his family, whether it's his parents or his wife or whatever.
Does methadone actually stop a person from wanting drugs?
Yes, it eliminates the craving for heroin, and it eliminates the withdrawal.
Are a lot of people at the clinic still using drugs?
Sure, most of them, I'd say 50% of
Yeah,
people
or
are
more.
and more. shoot coke or shoot heroin or take syrup, drink syrup or take some barbs or something. The methadone is good for your physical part, just to get, the sickness off, or just to keep you maintained at a normal level, but, you're still shooting drugs, like we still shoot drugs and everything, even though we're still on methadone. All that does, methadone just stops it, the craving, but you'll never, it's always in the back of your head and your mind. You want to get that needle in your arm, you want to get high,
Wow. That's a great clip to choose, yeah.
Well, it's an extraordinary film. I didn't see this film until a few years ago. I knew your filmography. It's not something I knew to see or seek out. It's an extraordinary film, and I think that clip does represent a bit of the territory that you're covering there. Because if the clip starts with this basic archival footage or sort of news footage introduced. This is about 15 minutes, 20 minutes into the film?
Something like that. A little history, the little section of the history of methadone.
Pops up, so we've met some people, we've worked through here, we've been introduced to the environment, but then this kind of pops up, this little very quick, let's catch us up to the issue at hand. And then we go right into, you can't get more sort of frank, candid conversations than those conversations of those two gentlemen.
I'm surprised seeing it, yeah. Well, yeah, I think that I want to say a couple things about that. I think you're about to say how do we get there, right?
Partly, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, that's in Dayton, Ohio, where we live. So we lived at 15 minutes from the clinic. But of course, it's a totally other world, a totally other culture. We were white. Mm-hmm. We had never had an addiction problem. We did drugs like everybody did in the 60s, but they knew we were coming into a different culture. Mm-hmm. And I think most of the folks there, well, first of all, let me say, we spent several months going to that clinic over and over again, weekly or several times a week, eventually, before Alicia ever came in.
So no camera?
No camera. The only thing we did do, which we always do to this day, is we brought in a still camera, and we would just take pictures of people. We'd say, hey, you mind if I take a picture of you? And some people would say no, and why do you want my picture? I don't know. You look cool today. I'll bring you a print. And then we would take them and get prints and give them to people, which we still do. It's like, as a filmmaker, you're asking people to give you so much, right? You're asking them to trust you and to give you so much. So the least we could do is give them a picture of themselves, a nice 4x6 print, which often when we went to people's houses, through all the films, they would be up sitting on their mantelpiece or on their kitchen fridge. Because who takes good pictures of themselves? So we did that for a long time and just would sit on the bench, sit in the back room and just watch people come and go. They would ask us what we're doing there. We'd tell them we thought this was an interesting place to make a film. We started realizing who was willing to talk with us, like that group of guys. Mm-hmm. We saw them often. They loved to joke around with us. They kind of loved that we were like these straight white people, and they were like telling us what things were like. Mm-hmm. You can sort of feel that there.
Yeah.
See, there's like there's an interest. Right. They were interested in us, we were interested in them. You kind of feel that, I think, in that scene, that we like each other. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And another thing is that it looks in this particular scene like most of the people who were addicted were African American, or were like street people, like the guy with the long hair and his wife, who had 2 children living with them, even though they were shooting up on a daily basis. It's kind of horrifying. But I don't think they felt that I was horrified. I think they felt I was interested in them. But a lot of the people who went to the methadone clinic were factory workers. Mm-hmm. Looking back, when I saw this film again recently, because I hadn't seen it in a long time, I was like, wow, a lot of them are either white or African American factory workers who got involved in drugs because of wanting to kind of blot out the factory work and didn't realize they were going to get addicted. Mm-hmm. And I think we were interested in that. So yeah, that was our method anyway, was to spend a lot of time before we brought a camera in at all.
Yeah. But you mentioned the factory work, because when I interviewed you at some point last year, for one of the conversations that we had, I reread a lot of Studs Terkel's
Oh
Working.
yeah, Working, yeah.
And it's interesting how often it comes up in factory stories about drug use,
about
amphetamines, whatever, like sort of how prevalent it was during that time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was a little bit in the Fuyao factory, but they did drug testing also. Okay. So, you know.
There's a sequence soon after the one we just watched, which I think speaks to what you're saying in terms of them liking you and wanting to tell you things, is that there's a sequence where it adds up to something, but when it starts playing, it feels very much just like an outgrowth of your curiosity, where you basically ask everybody what their days are like.
Oh, yeah.
What's a typical day like?
For you.
And it's the sort of thing where you just, I'm sure that for the most part, the sort of hell that a lot of these people are living through in their addiction, no one's stopping and saying, tell us what's
your day like? Yeah.
What's it like to wake up?
What's
what
a typical day? What do you do? Yeah.
And you get such thorough answers.
Yeah, people went really, because we knew him pretty well by then. Oh, I should mention too, this guy, Dr. Bourne. Okay, so when I look at this film, I think this is our second film. We're not as subtle as we are later, because we let him do his kind of PR thing. Yes, methadone, you don't want heroin. And then of course you have a scene where everyone's doing heroin and methadone or going from one to the other, which puts the lie to him, which is kind of mean, like it's kind of harsh. But on the other hand, we were trying to say that the national perspective on methadone as the cure-all that was being pushed out into the country, even to people who had only been on heroin for like less than a year, where they still had a pretty good chance of other kinds of treatment, drug-free treatment. We want to counter that. That guy later was busted for cocaine, was busted for like distributing cocaine or some major thing. He was.
Wow.
So he was booted out of his job. Yeah, well, right.
But I think that this, I understand what you're saying, but it's a really beautifully edited sequence, because though you're putting the lie to what he's saying, you're also giving him space to say what he's saying.
Right.
You're not just simply not including that point of view at all. And I think that's,
yeah.
Growing Up Female does the same thing, where like you're coming from a certain place, and yet you also let the dad speak. You let sort of people chime in, whether or not you love what they're saying.
Yeah.
You're letting it sit there.
Well, some filmmakers, like Mike Wallace, Mike Wallace, like he hammers on people and he really has a point of view. And a number of filmmakers have that. I won't mention any names. I think they're mostly guys, actually, now that I think of it, who like are really clear on what their point of view is. But I don't think we don't have a point of view. I think it's more like we try to have it revealed through the scenes we capture and the editing, and we try to find like what's the truth. And so that guy is basically, he knows it's not true. Yeah. I think he knows he's not so far up in Washington that he doesn't know what's going on. Sure. Well, I can't even,
it's hard.
Maybe he is, I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
So let's go to Union Maids. And
yes.
And I'm curious. So there's a phenomena. Maybe it existed then too. But I do think that there are more documentary films that get made these days. And sometimes documentary films get made about subjects we kind of know about in advance. Often they're celebrities, whatever, and you kind of know what the deal is. But then somebody tells the story, and maybe it's effective, and you know to go to it because you've heard of that story. Union Maids strikes me as one of these situations where you're actually telling a story that simply hasn't been told.
Yeah.
And so it's that much harder and more challenging, I would imagine, to do the work to get to the point of telling that story. So what is the backstory that leads us to Union Maids?
That makes it sound like we were really, really smart. I think it's like, no, I don't think so. We read, there was a book called Rank and File that's written by Alice and Staunton Lind, a couple who live in Ohio now. And the book is 26 interviews with rank and file labor organizers. I think 26. 3 of them were women. And a friend of ours who was also in the left, we were in an organization called the New American Movement, NAM, which is a precursor to DSA, actually. Anyway, Miles introduced us to the idea of doing this film. And we thought, yeah, let's go meet them. They all lived in Chicago. We did no research other than reading their interviews in this book. Alice or Staunton Lind made a phone call to each of them and said, you ought to talk to these guys. No, it was really we didn't, it was not a big deal. We had, we shot on 1-inch open reel video, which actually was obtained from here in Minneapolis from the public access channel. What's it called? Twin City Public Access? University Video. I forget what it was called.
UC Video? Does that sound familiar?
Okay, that sounds like it was, yeah. A guy named Steve Kolzicki. You know, they got 2 decks, 2 cameras, 2 tripods, loaded it all into a station wagon and drove it down to Chicago. We drove up from Dayton. We literally met those women and did the interviews the same day. No, I'm not kidding. We just thought it was going to be a little video that we were going to make. We did no research on history or anything like that at that time. We just shot the interviews. It was kind of like sitting at their feet and just as elders and just say like, well, what happened then? And what happened then? So that was it. 2 hours each, shake hands, meet, sit down, light the thing, and let's go. Well, that was how it started.
Yeah.
But then a lot more happened after that.
So let's get to that.
Let's see
watch
Union Maids, yeah.
Maids.
So we start getting out a paper called A Yard's Worker. And in this, we would talk about conditions in different departments. And wherever people worked, we made contacts with people who worked in other plants. We tried to find out where people worked in Robertson Oak, in Swifts, or Wilson's, etc. And we talk about these conditions. And then we try to sneak these papers into the washrooms and wherever anyone
We actually had to sneak around.
Oh, not only put them in our bosom, because there was inspection going in and out, you see. You were actually inspected.
And you had to sign a yellow dog contract.
What's that?
Which says, I pledge that I am not a union member, and as long as I am an employee of this company, I will not join a union.
They hired stool pigeons who came in to try to disrupt and break up the union. You know, one thing after another. And not only that, when our first big meeting that we had, the CIO rally, they had thugs come in with guns and try to threaten and scare us. You know, and they did. They scared off some women. You know, women did come around. And, But I was so, I was scared, but I went anyway, you know. I was getting together with these other people, young folk. By the way, they're all young. And saying, well, here the CIO is taking the organizing and the sit down in Flint. The steel workers are organizing, the automobile workers are. We want to organize too. We got out a whole bunch of leaflets and circulated them all over the stockyards and said we were having this meeting, this first meeting in School Hall. Tremendous turnout. We didn't have room to put the people in.
How many people came?
Hundreds and hundreds, I don't know. Maybe 500, 400, I don't know how big the hall was. But it was the most inspiring thing, this great. We had cards, we had Packing House Workers Organizing Committee cards. You know, I pledged to become a member of the union, so when we signed up people.
At this time, did you see yourself as a radical or as a socialist?
Oh, sure, because I wasn't about to do housework or anything else. Because now I was convinced I became a dedicated radical. You know, working with these friends whom I liked and respected very much. It made a lot of sense, you know.
Do you think very many of the people who were involved then in organizing the early CIO were also socialists?
Most of them were, I think. Most were dedicated or had sympathies in that direction.
What would a socialist society mean to working people?
Well, basically, a social society would mean that the means of production would be owned by them and that the fruits of their labor would be divided on a more equitable basis than it was. There wouldn't be this tremendous disparity, that there wouldn't be hunger, that there wouldn't be hovels for some people and palaces for others, that there wouldn't be different scales of education for children, that there wouldn't be war, hopefully, you know.
I sat in on the meeting. They were just having an organizing drive. And everybody was getting up saying, well, I didn't get anybody signed up today because, you know, they would say, well, the union isn't any good. And when you get a union, you're going to have to pay union dues out of your money. If you don't have a union, you don't have to pay any union dues. And they talked, and I kept getting so disgusted. Here are these people trying to sell the union, and they aren't saying anything but what the workers are telling them. They're not telling the workers anything. So I held up my hand, and this guy recognized me. I took the floor, and I said, you know, at the rate you're going and what I'm hearing here tonight, you just ain't never gonna get a union in this shop. If these people here are the ones that are trying to get the people to sign the cards and join, they just are not, because they're not selling union. They are letting the workers sell them no union. Why don't you? Nobody has said, now what is the union going to do for the workers when it gets in there? What are you going to do? It said, well, we're going to fight for more wages, better working conditions. We're going to fight, and they had grievances about something in the washroom. We're going to fight to straighten all that out. I said, did you tell them that? He said, of course. I said, why don't they tell the workers that? And I was really elected steward that night, and I think I signed up about 5 members that very first night. Look, I mean, you're not working on this assembly line if you don't join the union system. Please, let's get together.
We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved.
Okay.
So you left off by saying, and then it became something else.
Oh, yeah. Like afterwards. Yeah, right. Afterwards.
So you got those interviews, and then it became something else.
Yeah, like really listening to the interviews and listening to their stories. And don't forget, to me, these were like, I'm a working class kid. My dad was in a union. Did I learn about unions? Did I learn the history of labor? Was that ever even mentioned in class? No.
Right.
So I guess I felt like, you know, we need some stills. We should kind of expand this, not just have it be. It's funny because that particular clip just doesn't have any of the archival footage in it. It has some stills.
Yeah.
And you can see the difference between the 1-inch video and the stills. The stills look way better than the 1-inch open reel video. But you hopefully forget about that as you're watching the film.
Well, you do actually. I think you really do.
You do forget about it. You know, yeah. This film got a rave review from Vincent Canby. You know, and it's 48 minutes. I don't know. You know, got an Academy Award nomination, which was completely amazing. But here's what happened. Yeah. So we knew we needed stills. So I started. You know, I'm a big nerd and researcher, and I love to read and look for stuff. And I started finding these stills, and then I started, like, I'd see pictures of women holding rifles or women holding sticks with National Guard, you know, and it would say Gastonia, North Carolina, 1932. In the picture in these labor history books. And I would say, what the heck happened in Gastonia, North Carolina in 1936 or 32, whatever it was. And so I would have to look that up and look that up. And then, for some reason, we decided we needed some moving footage. We went to the National Archive, the Library of Congress in Washington, and found this treasure trove of visual history of America, right? That had been sitting on shelves since the 30s. And this was the 70s. Yeah, so it was like old footage. And we started gathering it and putting it in the film. So what would happen is we'd have a test screening in front of the Steenbeck, right? And so people would be talking like what you see here, you know, interviews and then stills. But as soon as there was moving footage, people would just like go like this, would just like sit up in their chair. So we realized we had to get more and more of that moving footage. And I got really interested in it too. Mm-hmm. So that's how the film kind of evolved to be a much more lively film than we thought it was going to be. Yeah.
Well, it's also interesting too, one of the things I really love about this film is though it's like literally just sitting at a table with these women.
That's it, right?
They become such full characters. Their manner, their way of speaking, their way of telling stories, what they're like. They're not just interview subjects. They're characters. And you must have, and that came alive, I guess.
Yeah, and we didn't know that.
Yeah.
They were amazing storytellers. These three women, when we went to make Seeing Red, we realized how hard it was to find people who were as good as they were at telling stories. Actually, we did.
Yeah.
They were, probably because of what they had lived through. I think if you live a life of, like they all did, of purpose, but also of like stepping out, of doing the embarrassing thing, of doing the hard thing. Like she talks about speaking up in the meeting. Well, they all talk about that. It changes you. You know what I mean? It's like you don't just live a narrow little life. They lived a larger life. And that made them, I think, partly great storytellers.
There's that moment where she talks about, I don't remember the names of the characters, about being a radical. And you ask, I'm curious about why you ask in that moment.
Oh, did you see yourself as radicals?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Probably because we saw ourselves as radicals and we didn't know whether they were kind of union activists or whether they saw themselves as radicals or even socialists. So I decided to ask them. I asked them all. And it was so, I don't know if you noticed how she hesitated. We were all dedicated radicals because what we didn't know, we were just so ignorant. I mean, really, I can't believe it to this day. They were all in the Communist Party. They were all in the Communist Party. And we didn't, one of them writes an article to the Daily Worker. She talks about being a socialist. Well, a socialist in the 30s was probably going to be in the Communist Party, right? But this film led us to make Seeing Red. And how that happened it's like a lot of these films, it just sort of happens. It's not like you sit around thinking, what should my next film be? You know what I mean?
Some do, yeah. But you don't. You don't work
no,
that way.
we don't. It's like something, like we didn't see ourselves as filmmakers until after this film was done and people started calling us the filmmakers. It's just like things happen and you think, we have some skills, we have some equipment, So we were sitting around at the premiere of this film, Union Maids, in Dayton. And we were all sitting around having a beer afterwards at our commune where we lived, our collective house, which was a media collective. And these three women were like talking late into the night, and they started talking about the party. Like, remember the days in the party? Oh yeah, wasn't he in the party? Oh yeah, he was. And remember that? And we were like, what party? What are you talking about? Believe it or not. And they said, and they sort of hesitated. And they looked at each other and they said, well, we were in the Communist Party. And we were astounded because we didn't know anything about that. And we had grown up with all the anti-communist stuff. Me as a Republican kid. And
right, you're the perfect age to have lived through the kind of...
the 50s and the early 60s.
Yeah.
The Red Scare. Oh, yeah, all that. And Jim out of Long Island, progressive parents, Jewish, but still anti-communist. Everybody was anti-communist, that was the world you grew up in. And then to realize these women who we loved and who we really got to know were all in the Communist Party, then we had to make a film about that. Right? It's like, it just was the next logical thing.
So I want to show a clip of that, but to set that up a little bit, I think it's important to talk about. So this film was 1976.
It came out in 76. We shot the interviews in 74.
Okay.
And then with all the research and activism in our lives, it took 2 years to finish it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then Seeing Red is the early 80s.
Came out in 83.
Which I think is I want to talk about that, but I think that setting up that this film came out in 83 is a really important.
Because you know who was in the White House.
So,
right.
So we're actually, and to that point, we're going to actually start from, this is the one clip we're actually going to start from the very beginning of the film.
Okay.
So this is the first several minutes of Seeing Red.
Okay, great.
Hello. In the traditional motion picture story, the villains are usually defeated. The ending is a happy one. I can make no such promise for the picture you're about to watch. The story isn't over. You and the audience are part of the conflict. How we meet the communist challenge depends on you. What has happened so far, what is happening now, is far from encouraging.
And where do you think this is? It's communist-inspired rioting in San Francisco, USA. Look at those faces. The face of communism in America. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Herbert Philbrick.
As I travel around, I still have people say, well, why are you so hard on communists? They're just another political party like any other, and a poor minority at that, and so misunderstood. Well, we don't want them misunderstood, and that's why we're making this film. And that's why I say they are lying, dirty, shrewd, godless, murderous, determined, and it is not an American political party like any other. It's an outlaw organization, taking its orders and instructions from another government to do everything possible to destroy our government. It's an international criminal conspiracy.
It is a way of life, an evil and malignant way of life. It reveals a condition akin to disease that spreads like an epidemic. And like an epidemic, a quarantine is necessary to keep it from infecting this nation.
No man risks his life the way I have.
Oh, listen, I'm sick of that. Many millions of men risk their life, and they could come before this committee and answer the question whether or not they were a member of the Communist Party. And let me remind you that Benedict Arnold was also a member of the Armed Forces of the United States.
You're implying...
Proceed with the question.
You're implying I'm a traitor. No.
You heard what I said.
am no Benedict Arnold. It's a mighty shame that a man like me has to be brought here and crucified in the press and everything. Well, your stealers are bred from children. I have 3 kids.
Mr. Watchinich.
That's what you are.
Will you answer the question, please?
I did. I know about my own.
Hi, remember me? I'm the person who's doing the film. Well, I was calling back to see if you decided yet whether you'd be willing to do an interview with us for the film. Uh-huh. You feel... Yeah. But look, you've been attendance leader for what, 15 years now? Okay, more than 15 years. And the people know your work, and they trust you. Do you really feel as if they found out now that you had been a communist, that they'd somehow decide you aren't a good person now? Yeah, I know I realize it's a risk. Uh-huh. Okay, well, that's your decision.
It was a decision I had to make. A lot of work I do is either federally or state funded. So, they might say, well, we can't have a known communist. But then I said, if I die, why shouldn't there be a record? How could I have been so good when I was active and be so bad because I tell them I'm a communist? And I felt that I owe it to everybody who knows me to know who I was and who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
It's not easy on friends and family, but I really believe it's better to put your cards on the table.
How did you feel sort of proclaiming to the world that you are part of the communist
Well,
movement?
while you were gone, Ben and I talked about that.
Oh, really?
Yes, we did. We feel like a lot of people are going to be surprised if they find out. And I feel those who know us and like us, it'll be real good that they find out if they don't know.
How about those people who might feel negative?
Well, talk shit.
I mean, that's how I feel.
That's a good opening.
That's a good opening. That's how you open a film. That's really something. Because it really just, you set up those stakes. You set up like, this is the world that leads us to this moment. These are older people who are still, it takes some convincing to even talk about their lives and who they are.
Yeah.
And so, but we had talked about this backstage, but how this is the one film that we made outside of Dayton, but there was one couple here in the beginning that was in Ohio.
The tough shit lady. Well, this is how it all started, actually, is, you know, it's not easy to get someone to agree to be in a film about the Communist Party, and we're talking the late 70s still. Yeah. And so the first people we interviewed were those two folks in Cleveland, and we had gone to school with their son, Mike Gray, a couple years older than me, and he said, I'll convince my parents. And so he convinced them, and we did lots and lots of interviewing with them. We found out a lot about how people were treated, like during the McCarthy period. I mean, they had those two people in their neighborhood in East Cleveland had the FBI or whoever put spotlights, huge spotlights onto their house all through the night for weeks and weeks and weeks. Like, so that all the neighbors, you know, found out, like she says, tough shit, but, you know, anyway, so we started with somebody we knew, and then they made phone calls to people in Chicago, and the union maids, women who were all in the Communist Party, also made phone calls, because nobody would talk to you unless you were vouched for by somebody else. You don't just pick up the phone. Like that woman I was talking with had been recommended by somebody else. And that stack of cards, those were each of those was an individual card that we had notes on, and we had who was our contact, and that was just the New York area communists. I mean, we interviewed like 400 people to kind of get the story, because there was no like book about the Communist Party at that time that was not either pro-communist, like this is my life in the Communist Party and I'm damn proud of it, or very there were shelves of anti-communist books, which I read most of. But what was your question again?
No, we're doing great. But did you talk to, what did you say? You were saying, we want to hear your story? Can you tell your story?
Yes. You know, first of all, we had to get recommended by somebody. We would go to their apartment or their house. Usually they would interview us first, right? Union Maids was a huge calling card because everybody had seen it, and they knew what side we were on, and they knew we knew how to make a film. Sure. That was another important thing. But I think what you're maybe really asking is, like, what was that beating heart for us, or for me, let's say, why we pursued this for 6 years.
And what they thought that they were contributing to.
Right, which they had to trust us. Yeah. I mean, it was not, it was a larger idea, yes, isn't it about time that this piece of American history is put back in the history books. They could all agree to that. The thing was, how were we going to treat the history of their party and their own history? I will say, there were two big motivations for us. One was we were part of a new left as young people, and it was beginning to sort of look shaky in the late 70s into the 80s of whether those movements could sustain our lives, sustain anybody's life. So we wanted to look to how an earlier movement had kept going and how people supported each other or not, or how it worked. Another thing, though, and I have to admit, this was really, for me, I think for Jim, a real question. Were they spies? Were they traitors? Were they operating under guidance from another country? Like, who were they really, right? Who were they really as people? And we didn't just interview them. We spent a lot of time with them. We met their neighbors, we met their friends, we hung out with them over days in some cases. So we found out the answer to that, which was really important to us. So it was like, like what motivated them. And we really wanted to get to the bottom of it, to see how many people would say, well, I really did like the Soviet Union, and I really did think we should have that kind of system over here. Or yes, I have to admit, I did pass a secret. You know what I mean?
Sure.
We really tried to get to the bottom of all that, as well as tried to get to the bottom of how did you sustain your movement from the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, even when they were under attack from the McCarthy era.
Yeah.
So, by the way, this is my growing up again comes in here. When I was a little girl, my dad took us to Washington, all bundled into the car, to meet the greatest living American, which was Joe McCarthy, Senator Joe McCarthy. He wanted us to meet, and we all met him and shook his hand, and anyway. So again, I'm not sure.
I don't even know what to say. I'm shocked. Wow.
No. And Jimmy's favorite TV show growing up was I Led 3 Lives. Herbert Philbrook, had a weekly TV show where he would stop the communists from blowing up the school or killing the governor or whatever. Yeah. So we had personal reasons, as well as we felt we should put that history, which is the precursor to our movement.
Sure.
Right? We also wanted to find out why did their movement fail? It wasn't only, they stuck it out through the McCarthy period, most of them, as hard as it was. But when it came out that their movement was deeply flawed, which you'll see in the movie, you'd have to see it.
Yeah.
We really wanted to get to the bottom of that so that our movement wouldn't make those same mistakes. Following another country, democratic centralism, secrecy, we get into all that. Mm-hmm. So the film is not just it's definitely not the history of the Communist Party.
Sure.
It's people, the choices they made, how it affected the rest of their life, how they were impacted by the Red Scare, the McCarthy period, and then how they were affected when it turned out that the movement they devoted their life to was rotten from the inside. That was the hardest thing, and that's when people left, when they were disillusioned about the very purpose and meaning of the larger communist movement in the world. That was heartbreaking for them.
We need to keep going.
Keep going. Okay,
because
sorry.
You have a very long, amazing career. But I want to. This is maybe.
We have to watch our time. Yeah.
That's okay. But the that's my job. So this comes out in 1983. The world of the Reagan era that it comes out, and then you're nominated for another Oscar for this film, and then there's some time between this documentary and the next documentary that you made, and that's a lot of time to cover.
Which was A Lion in the House.
It's A Lion in the House, which we want to talk about next. But I'm just curious, how would you describe what happened during that time? Because you look at somebody's filmography, you're like, oh, they weren't busy, they weren't making things, but that's probably not true at all.
No, it's not true. Well, I will say, and I don't know if you're going to ask about collaboration, but this would be a good time to bring it up, actually.
Well, because a different collaboration emerges.
Yes. My life changed a huge amount.
Yeah.
I think so my relationship with Jim broke up. I had a daughter during making of Seeing Red, and she was 3 when it came out. She was 8 when we broke up, 7 or 8, I forget. And then there was the, separating of everything, and it was horrible, and our daughter was very angry and all that stuff. And then I met Steve, and we sort of slowly formed our relationship after we fell in love. But what happened in terms of film, actually, and we're not going to go into this in too much detail, we spent 10 years in the world of fiction, of trying to make fiction. And we did make a fiction feature, which I don't ever show in my retrospective, which a lot because I hadn't had it digitized in time, and I haven't actually looked at it again. Mm-hmm. I haven't quite been ready for that.
Not ready to, yeah.
So, but, I wanted to learn fiction. I think a lot of documentarians feel they're not a real filmmaker, right, until they've made fiction. Mm-hmm. I felt that as a 30-something filmmaker. So we made some shorts, we made a fiction feature. What all happened? We moved out of Dayton into a farm in the country for 4 years. We heated with wood. You know, we had a very different life for a while. And some of it has to do with your relationship. You know, you want to start again. Yeah. You want to start again. And I think the kind of collaboration that Jim and I had, and I'll be real honest, ended up harming each other, and I think Steve and I started wanting to never do that. And I don't know if I could say a little bit about that. Like, Jim and I would have the kind of arguments that I would say would become personal and would like go for the jugular, would be like yelling and sort of insulting each other, and it was horrible. But we were young. Yeah. We were really young. We were exhausted. We were facing with seeing red, especially. Our first color film, a feature film. We wanted it to go to theaters. It was a big deal, not like the 3 before, which were little black and white films, you know. And I think all the stress of that and being parents led us to just not be kind to each other. So
you don't want to replicate that.
Yeah, with Steve, you know, what we decided was we would never work together. We would never co-direct, which of course didn't happen. But for a long time, like, Steve made a film called Personal Belongings.
Which is an extraordinary film.
Which is a great film, but that he's the director of that. I made a fiction feature. I'm the director of that. We're co-writers of that, but I'm the director. And we always said, and then we did start working together with A Lion in the House, which I know we're getting to, but we always said, we set up a rule that if we differed on an edit or on a direction to go or whatever, we'd have it out. We'd say what we had to say, maybe 2 or 3 times, but then we'd pull back. We would never go for the jugular. We would never make it personal. We would realize that our relationship was more important than any film, which I don't think with Jim I quite realized that. I think I was just too young to realize that. That relationships are more important than any film that you're making.
That's hard to know, though, because you care so much about the thing that you're doing. There's so much conviction behind what you're doing. To say this isn't important in some way, of course.
Yeah, it's super important. Yeah. But so we lost our relationship because of that, and it was really sad and really hard. But on the other hand, I learned as a person a lot more about truly collaborating in a much more humane way that can last for as many years as Steve and I have lasted, which is 25 or 30. I don't even know now how many years, but it's a long time.
Yeah. So let's talk about the beginning then to actually work together on A Lion in the House.
On A Lion in the House,
and how that became the first project for the two of you.
Yeah, well, as I said, we were never going to work together. But then, we're going to show a clip of Lion?
We are, yeah.
Okay, so we're not going to show the beginning, though. So Leela, our daughter, my daughter, Steve's stepdaughter, at age 16 got cancer, which was, you know, shocking, and we had no experience with cancer. She had a rough year. She was okay. She's fine today. You know, she's 40 and has 2 kids. And it was a very hard year. We lost a lot of time. But at the end of that year, as she was finishing her treatment, and we had learned so much from that year, we got a phone call at our house, just out of the blue, from this doctor who was the head oncologist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And he said, "Have you ever seen the film Hoop Dreams?" And of course we said, "Well, yeah, it's one of our favorite films." And he said, actually Steve was on the phone, he said, "How would you like to make the hoop dreams of childhood cancer?" And we had just finished our treatment for cancer. So Steve said, "No," and hung up. You know, it's like, because we didn't want to go back there. It was like so hard. But then we talked about it. He came to me immediately and said, "You won't believe this phone call." And we immediately talked about it. And I think my recollection is it was like 10 minutes later that we were like, we are the right people to do this. It is a life-changing event in one's life to deal with cancer. So we thought, it's a little bit like like all these films, but this one really was like E.T. You know the film E.T.? When the little boy, later in the film, the doctor, they want to take E.T. away, and he says, but he came to me. He came to me. And he's so passionate. And I felt that way about this phone call and this thing that happened. So I felt like we had to make this film. We were the only people who had the skills as filmmakers and who also had the experience. In other words, it wasn't like we're an idea.
Yeah.
We had lived it. We were in this community. We were part of this. So when we walked into those rooms, I was another mom. I wasn't just like a filmmaker with an idea or a news crew. We were like, you know, my kid had Hodgkin's disease. What did your kid have? Oh, what treatment did that? You know, you're immediately talking just as moms.
Right.
Right? And that made, I would have never thought or never would have answered that call, yes, if it hadn't happened to us, if it hadn't come to us.
So it was really important, I think, to show a clip from this film and to talk about this film, because I know that for this is a longer film, 3.5 hours or so.
Almost 4 hours.
Almost 4 hours.
And not too long.
Not too long, but it's a hard film to program, and so I think it wasn't shown this week. But I think it's an opportunity for you all to see some of this. We can talk a little bit more afterwards.
This is a scene from well into the film.
This is about an hour and 20 minutes into the film.
Yeah, it's one. There's 5 kids' stories. This is the oldest kid, who's a teenager. Actually, you aren't going to see him, but you'll see his parents, and it's well into his journey. Like you've already gotten to know him, and his parents and his brother and sister. They've already appeared. Yeah, I just want you to know this. We don't jump in here. Yeah, okay.
The dining room.
If the oxygen saturation in Justin's blood slips below 90%, it's dangerous. If it falls into the 50s, he could have permanent brain damage.
I have a 20-year-old patient who desatted very acutely down to the 50s.
Dr. Gillen is a new resident. She starts her month rotation tonight.
They dropped at like 57.
Goodness.
Yeah.
I was just saying how good you were.
Inhale, exhale. Inhale.
Because Justin wants everything done, the staff feel they have to move him to the ICU.
Where we are right now is sort of at the maximum that can be done here.
Right.
We're there.
I know where you're coming from, but I don't think it would be of a benefit as of yet for him.
Mom doesn't want him to come up right now, so that takes care of that. Right. He is full code status, intubate, full everything.
We can't go any further than 15 liters.
Right. He shouldn't be down here on 15 liters.
Jack wanted him up an hour ago, and she said no, she didn't want him back up there, but she wasn't going to change his code status.
We're not offering you the best options. We're offering you like what's the lowest
I don't
risk.
like to go with those scenarios yet until it's an absolute.
I understand. I can't imagine being in that situation, and I understand that. That's fine.
So we're there.
Okay.
An hour later, Justin has stabilized.
Do you think his mind's going to come back? I don't think his mind's going to come back. Well, I think the decision pretty much is if he acutely desats again, he's going upstairs for BiPAP. And if Mom refuses to send him upstairs again, then she needs to change his TRS. She needs to change his resuscitation status.
and the final path reports, I believe, are still pending. I was talking to her last night about, I don't have any good options for you, but these are the options and she really was not ready to hear that unless it's, that time.
I think the fundamental issue is one of when does one stop? And if this is hard for us, it's impossible for them. It's a very difficult situation.
We weren't there just to make him comfortable. We were there to save our kid. It was a commitment to him to do everything possible.
I don't think it's humane to let a person lay there and slowly die. I don't think it's humane at all. I don't want to voice my opinion, though, because my mom and my dad, I don't think, want to hear it. Adam feels the same way about what we think they should do. I don't know, I just kind of keep my mouth shut and go on.
Dale decides to call a family meeting.
But the question is, should we put him back on the antibiotics and stuff? They're not real crazy about it, the doctors and the staff. But, Justin, what he would have wanted.
Basically, it boils down to is how long you want to drag it out.
I think it's kind of pointless. Put him back on the antibiotics.
You can do all the antibiotics you want, but it's not going to help mend the lungs.
Right.
And I think the antibiotics have hurt him enough.
Yeah, I mean, when you say enough's enough, we could be here a month from now.
You can't keep him asleep forever and keep pumping him full of stuff for a month. That's just not humane. I think they should just let him like he is and let him go peacefully instead of putting more crap into him.
The question I got too, if Justin was sitting there and it was somebody else sitting in there, what would he say?
Can't really answer for Justin.
No, what would he say? What did he always say about all that stuff?
To keep going.
Yeah, but I mean, if he thought that there's no chance to do anything, I don't think he'd want to just keep on going like that, though. And
he's comfortable now.
Yeah.
We'll wait 2 days. We'll discuss it again.
Oh, well, he's always been a pain in the ass. Yeah. Old him, too. Yeah, Man. Make an alcoholic out of you, that's for sure.
Yeah. That's a hell of a scene.
It's just a masterclass, honestly, in how to tell a story like that. And I know the way you introduced it gives us a little bit of a hint, but the ability to go from one point of view to another, not shooting for a couple of years and then constructing a scene based on this. This is all happening
one night,
over
yeah.
the course of an evening.
Right.
And you're going from one room to the other. And just be able to have that kind of freedom to do that, but then also to have everyone giving of themselves to you and letting you be a witness to this. There must have been just sort of a collective, they all had their different points of view and there were all different reasons for why they thought this might be valuable, but clearly there was a collective sense that this should be observed, that this should be captured in some way. Were there conversations about that very thing before a night like this?
Well, when you're going through something like that, and actually many of the times the parents and the kids are going, what they're dealing with is so much more important than the fact that we're there.
Sure.
They're dealing with, is their son going to die tonight? And the doctor, Ted, and the nurses have different points of view, actually. The nurses want him to go to ICU. And this poor resident, it's her first night, and she's never dealt with children's oncology before. Residents, she probably came from like heart and lungs and whatever, and here she lands on pediatric oncology with a patient who's supposed to die. And we interview her again a month later when Justin is still alive. Anyway, so one thing is, yes, we're there at their shoulder with the camera, but we've been at their shoulder for like a year or more with our little camera, and it was only ever me and Steve. There was no crew.
No other person, yeah.
No, it was me and Steve. I think once or twice I had to bring somebody else because Steve had the flu or whatever, you know, or he had to bring somebody else. But basically, it was me and Steve. And they had to really like us. They had to want us around. Yeah. We actually would do things that you might say were not improper exactly, but we would bring people. There was a White Castle right near the hospital. And we would call ahead, and we knew some of the folks really liked White Castle, so we would say, hey, what should we pick up for you? We're going to stop at White Castle. Now, supposedly you don't do that, but you want to be a good person in the room. And so we'd bring them a cup of coffee or whatever, egg sandwich. It was just me and Steve. We were always there. This family, we're still close to this family. We're so close to all the families, really. But this family in particular, they would call us when something happened. In this case, yeah, we were in Brooklyn for Christmas, and they called, the mom called, Debbie, and said, you know, Justin is not doing well, I think you better come back. And we literally got in the car and drove back. Anyway, things happened over Christmas and New Year's. I think it was just us being there and trying to be good people in the room. You know, sometimes they say when you're doing verite work, this was the rule that I learned from other people, which we didn't follow, which is you're just a blank slate. Yeah. You just observe, you don't have a reaction, you're just, but that would not have worked in those rooms. You have to be a person they want in the room who like behind the mic, if I'm miking, which I mostly mic down, not like this, well, sometimes like this, I'd be looking at them and responding and talking and joking, even though we kept the camera rolling. Anyway, we tried to be good people in the room. Talking about multiple points of view, we knew all the doctors, we knew all the nurses. We could glide, since there were just two of us, from one room to the next. We'd hear the family's point of view. We'd go to the doc and say, what just happened? We always went to the nurse meetings. We always went to the doc's meetings. They were used to us being there. They were fine with it. This was a real precursor to American Factory.
That's exactly
what
I was going to
this
get
was
to,
a real, this and the Methadone film, by the way, where I learned how to be in a different culture than my own, how I learned how to be sort of laughed at and,
you can ask the dumb question. It's okay.
Exactly right. Ask the dumb question. So, this I think was part of the path that made it possible for me and Steve to deal with what we've discovered in American Factory. Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, and which
multiple points of view and trying to listen to everybody fairly.
Sure.
Not making a jerk out of anybody. Right.
But then also there's the 360, getting all the points of view, but then also entering into spaces where maybe other filmmakers have not been permitted or not permitted to this degree. The sort of fluidity between the spaces in the hospital there. There's no door being closed.
No, you really have to be willing to commit, though, to you are going to be there come hell or high water, if it's a year, if it's 2 years, if it's 3 years. And that's why you make films near where you live. Right? I mean, so you can just get in the car and go there. Right? That's a key to making this kind of film.
And this is also to relate to American Factory too. And I don't know how deep into other clips we're going to get, so I think it's worth just starting to talk about American Factory, which is that in American Factory there is also this sense of, are you going to betray trust? Because you're earning this trust from all these different people. And like here in this situation, you're going from doctors or nurses meetings into speaking to the family. Is the family asking you what happened in that meeting? Are they asking you for information? How are you carrying more information at all times than kind of everybody else has?
Sometimes we knew more than the parents did. We really did. We knew that everybody thought the child was dying. And the parents, well, you could kind of see that. They were there to save their kid. And that's true in a number of the kids. Yes, we were. Did we talk with them about it? No. I mean, no, not really. And, you know, they kind of knew not to ask us. I'm not sure, you know, again, they're so focused on their child, right? And the nurses and docs are so focused on their work. Everybody's working. That's another thing. It's like they're workers, the doctors, the nurses, the resident, they're all working. No, we didn't betray, I don't know, we didn't tell people what we knew. That was hard sometimes. You have to see the film. After you see the film, I could tell you because.
But so that was a challenge in American Factory then too, right? In this case, you were at times you were asked, or there was suspicion around what you did know, because you're carrying from right, so the administration to the workers, from the factory floor to the boardrooms.
Administration, yes, but owner.
But owner, yeah.
Owner, manager, HR. We had to, the people, we observed some union meetings. You know what I mean? Like but we had to really keep, everybody had to know that we were going to be fair, that we wanted to hear their point of view. I mean, something we always ask people, you know, you realize everyone is going through something hard. Like this film, everyone is trying their best. Everyone's going through something hard. You can't judge them. Like, I learned so much about compassion and not judging people for the rest of my life. And I consider that a great gift. And so going into work with like the owner, the management, you know, I just knew they were all trying hard to make this thing succeed. And they all had, like I would ask people, what keeps you up at night? You know, what was your challenge today? What was your challenge yesterday? Or I heard this happened. How did you react to it? You know, I heard there was a huge flood in the plant. How did you react to it? And truly recognizing that they were all trying to do their best. I didn't feel like there were really enemies. Even though I know what side of the barricades I'm on, politically, you know, like all the white people in Lyon were Republicans. All the black people were Democrats. You know, did that come up? No, not really, but you know, I knew that. Most of the management and HR, most of them in factory were Republicans. Many of the workers were Democrats. That was not something we talked about. But we did, okay, I'll give this one example because it kind of shows you what we had to go through. So, you know, management and HR and those folks drive around on golf carts. This is a huge factory, an American factory. It's huge. And it's concrete floors, and you're wearing heavy boots with steel toes. And you're walking carrying a camera and a tripod. So sometimes one of the management people would go by and say, hey, you want to ride? You know, and at first we would say, oh yeah, thanks. You know, we'd get on the little golf cart and we'd ride back to, you know, the waiting room. But then we'd be whizzing by workers who knew us, and you could tell they were thinking, oh, they're with management, they're getting a ride, because the workers would never get a ride. And we realized we couldn't do that. Like we just realized, all of us, that we can't accept those kind of rides because we have to be neutral. We couldn't be seen just talking to union people. We had to talk to people who were not for the union. We couldn't just be seen, you know, we had to really be friendly and fair to everybody. That was years in the doing, but I think we did it. I don't know.
You definitely did it. Years in the doing seems like a really important part of this too, because you know, if you had just had one afternoon with the chairman in American Factory, maybe you would have had a somewhat flat understanding of him. But to spend years with him and have him continue to let you shoot in a factory where things were not going particularly well, will adjust maybe the way you may think of who that person is, or the scope of who that person is. And I think in a different respect that happens in a line in the house as well, where you meet a doctor in a certain scene that maybe doesn't handle something particularly well.
And you don't like the guy
And then
first,
6 months
right?
to a year later, you see him handle a situation differently or talk to you differently, and you get to see more of the person. It seems like time is a big part of this.
Yeah, time and just letting people feel that you're going to be fair, that you're honest, that you really want to know. Oh yeah, yes, that happened. It's kind of like what we do, I guess, is try to be good listeners, be curious, not get too much in people's, I don't know, I guess I was going to say not getting too much in people's face, but actually we did a lot. We're like always there. And then with Factory, it wasn't just two of us. That we had like 5 cinematographers. Right. My nephew Jeff, Eric Stoll, my former student, and Aubrey, my former. We use a lot of help from former students and family, because they'll work for cheap. At least at first, until you get funding.
Right.
And then they get paid.
They get paid.
Yeah. So.
What does a life like this cost, and what does it give you?
Oh.
To spend time, to put this much emotion and care into work like this, which yields this extraordinary body of work. What does it take out of you, and what have you gotten from it?
Wow. Well, I'm very proud of the films, and I'm very happy there's a retrospective that the Wexner Center did and the booklet that they did, and I'm very glad the films are getting rediscovered and people seem to be finding them relevant. But, I mean, it cost me my first relationship. It cost me many years of conflict with my daughter because of that. It cost me my health in some ways. I think, I'm a cancer survivor twice. Well, actually 3 times. I believe that has something to do with the extreme stress you go through to make these kind of films and the isolation you go through from your friends and your community. You don't see your family. Right. You don't see your friends. They don't know what you're doing. You kind of disappear. I think somebody when I had a relapse just last fall of my cancer, which was very bad news, somebody from Netflix, when I told him, said, I hope we didn't cause that. And of course, we meaning all the stress of like being on the road with the film and all that. And I said, oh, no, of course not. But then I thought about it and I thought, it probably did. And then I started doing research into stress and cancer. And I learned that it doesn't cause cancer, but it's definitely related to relapse of cancer if you have it. Your body does not want to be in that amount of stress that you're under to do these kind of things. So I'm proud of the work, but we'll find out, but it could be because I have a fatal cancer. I don't have a cancer that can be cured. So we'll see what happens, what it costs me in my life if I get to make another film or not. So I don't know, would I have not made these films in order to have a better relationship with my grandkids and my friends? And that's a hard one. That's a hard one to say.
But it's interesting that you still talk about making another film. It's not like it's not like the light bulb goes off and you're like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. You want to keep doing it.
You know what? You're right. Why should I be doing this? I never thought of that, Eric. I honestly never thought of that. Should I be doing this? It's all I know how to do.
That's what you do.
That and teach that.
Right.
That's all I know how to do.
So. And is it the fact that the relationship that you have with Steve now is
Well,
such a beautiful one, and
yeah.
and you've been on this journey together. I would imagine that, and this is what you do together. I would imagine that's got to be a factor too in terms of this collaboration.
Well, you know, Steve has been an incredible support for me and through all this cancer stuff, like an incredible support. Like you could not imagine better support. My daughter also has been a really good support. But I think the bond we forged when we made a Lion in the House together and went through, you know, the death of children who we loved and watching what their parents went through, I think that forged a bond that is just unbreakable. It's like, it's hard to imagine that our relationship could ever break up. Yeah. And I also think that those breaks we put on it that I mentioned earlier, the fact that we will put something to bed and talk about it another day, yeah. It does, you know, I don't know, making this kind of work, it really does take everything you have and more. I mean, it just does. It takes everything we have and everything the people close to us have to support us, to make it happen. So yeah, I'm proud of the work. I'm proud that we've put some chapters back in American history. And we have a new film that's coming out in like 2 weeks, right?
2 weeks from today or today,
2 weeks
think?
from...
2 weeks from today.
Oh, 2 weeks. Oh my God. That's terrible. And
Yeah.
we worked on it all morning,
Yeah.
you know, and we'll work on it early tomorrow morning. But it's another chapter of American history that we're very proud to put back in, which is, I don't know if you, I mean, I could mention what it is.
9 to 5.
It's called 9 to 5, the story of a movement. And everybody knows the song. Working 9 to 5, right, that song. And the movie, the Jane Fonda, Dolly Parton, Lily Tomlin movie. But what everybody knows that. But what people don't know is that came out of a movement that had already existed for like 8 years or almost a decade. So we decided to tell the story of that movement, right? And it's all women. It's a movement of clerical workers who started to demand, you know, stop pinching my ass. I'm not a girl. I want a chance for advancement. I want equal pay to men. Things we haven't achieved yet, a lot of it. But they started it in the 70s. And that's the film we're about to come out with. So it's like, I don't know, I always talk about that word radical. Somebody said, were you a radical? Yes, I was. But I just want to say this. You know, we were called radicals. Bernie Sanders is called radical. I'm not saying I'm a Bernie fan, but he's called a radical. The communists were called radicals, you know. But if you think about it, the word radical, the abolitionists were called radical. And look what they stood for and how they changed America. The suffragists were called radicals. And look what they stood for and how they changed America. The Wobblies were called radicals. The socialists were called radicals. The early union people were called radicals. You know, the union maids were called radicals. What they have served to do, radical movements, is like increase American democracy, right? Make democracy available to more people, right? That's what radical movements have served to do, in my opinion. And if we've helped people understand that, the way the communists helped us get the 8-hour day and helped us get Social Security, right? And the way the union movement made a blue-collar middle class possible that I grew up with, and how the 9 to 5 people first used the word sexual harassment, right? And how they showed that women were actually workers, We're not working for pin money. We're not working, to be able to buy an extra dress or whatever. But they were real workers with real concerns. If we can put that perspective back into our sense of American history, I feel very proud of what we've done. And I like that we've made oral history films and cinema verite films. Yeah. You do what the situation demands, right, so, yeah.
and
anyway.
You're interviewing people in controlled settings, you're interviewing people in uncontrolled settings, you're working with archival footage, you're working with you've done it all, really responding to what the subject demands, what the situation demands.
Yeah, pretty much, and what we feel challenged to do, I guess, in a way. They're all big challenges, but a lot it's responding to what the story is and what the film seems to call for. Like, you don't make those decisions ahead of time. You just get in there. I always say, stick your foot in, then start wading in, and if it feels good, keep going. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that. It's like D.A. Pennebaker, one of our mentors, D.A. Pennebaker. We lost him recently. He always said, just immerse. Immerse. That's the thing you should always keep in mind. Yeah. Well, that's what we've done.
You use the word radical to talk about all the things you just talked about, and I think your politics are what they are, and you don't shy away from them. At the same time, I do think that the word radical certainly applies to the tenacity you have to ask questions, and to actually listen, and to actually take what you hear and put them into a film. I think that, especially in 2020, I think since you began, but certainly now, I think it's quite a radical act to actually ask and listen and take and convey that experience to
good.
People.
Yeah, that's true.
We have 8 minutes till we have to leave the room.
Oh my God.
So I'm wondering if we should just convene in the lobby and talk, or whether we should talk for 2 questions. A few questions in here. We'll start, and then we'll continue after we recover.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Yeah. This has been long.
So we'll take a few questions.
Thank you. This is awesome. I've enjoyed it. Yeah.
Are there microphones? Are there questions? We have time for a few.
Thank you so much for your talk and for all of the life that you've shared with us. I'm curious about the fiction phase.
Oh yeah.
It's easy to see that you were attracted to try something new, but what was it that you didn't find there? That, and not to talk about the film specifically, but what didn't you find that brought you back to fiction?
To nonfiction.
Sorry, to nonfiction.
To bring you back to.
Yeah. I'll tell you. I want to say 2 things, and that's a great question. One is that film is the most personal, you could say. It's the main character is a person who's kind of based on me, more than I sort of realized at the time, but it's kind of based on me. I hate to say that, which is probably why I don't want to watch it again. It's really about the 60s generation, fast forward, and it's falling apart, and where is our movement? And a relationship is kind of falling apart too at the same time, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the person is questioning even being a filmmaker. But the other thing that I would say is that, we traveled around with that movie. It got into festivals and we traveled around, but the conversations you would have around the table with other filmmakers, the fiction folks, they were about the next deal and what actor you had signed and what distributor you had, and it was a lot of ego. I just felt there was so much ego with the fiction filmmakers. Whereas I feel like if you hang out with documentarians, they're talking about their subject matter. They're talking about their struggles. They're talking about what's going on for their characters. And I always thought that was, and you could talk, I always thought that was more interesting. And the people were more interesting, and there was a lot less ego. So I would say that's what happened. And I felt like, okay, I've learned how to make a fiction film. We had a crew of 70 people. But I just didn't want to ever go through it again. Especially, I just really didn't. it was so much not in our control. Like once I got to start the directing process, like once I said, can't we stop? There's a beautiful sunset going on. Can't we just stop all these cars and shoot it like you would do if it were me and Steve and there was a moonrise or a beautiful, we just stop a car and shoot it. No, we can't do that. We're on a schedule. Lunch is coming up. No, or whatever. So it was just not in our control. So I didn't like it. But thanks for the question.
It's also, just to piggyback that briefly, because I know we have to move on, but that's also, it's interesting, because you had your own reasons at that moment, but something was in the air, because Michael Moore made a fiction film, Errol Morris made a fiction film, Steve James, they all...
Barbara Koppel,
all around that time. Yeah. Documentary filmmakers were experimenting in fiction. It's interesting.
Yeah, there was something about wanting to prove yourself. And none of them were that successful.
No, not a one.
Actually, no,
not a
they
one.
weren't.
Okay, yeah.
I have a very quick question. There's such a profound sense of reciprocity in your work. Even though you're showing us other people, you're also there experiencing you. And it seems so consistent from one film to the next. I was wondering about American Factory or other films where you took a long time making it and being with these people. Did you ever show them clips, and did they see what they look like, and did that create problems? Because their ego then is part of the equation.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna, growing up female, Union Maids we did show to them. Okay, we learned a lot. I mean, me and Steve have the definite practice of always showing the work, the film, to the people in it before other people get to see it, always. And with Lion, you have to see Lion because there's people who make, you see people who make very, what you would say as a viewer is like a bad decisions. And are not there for their kids, perhaps when they should be. And it was hard for them to see. But they all said, and they all saw, each family saw it separately with all their friends or whatever, and they all said, no, this is fair, this is fair. And they said, it's hard to watch, but it's fair. This is true. We showed Truck, The Last Truck, ahead of time. We showed Lion. We showed people who were in American Factory, which we're referring to. We didn't necessarily show them the whole film because it's like almost 2 hours long. And there were so many people, but we showed them any part they were in before the film came out. We wanted to make sure they didn't feel they would get fired. We wanted to make sure they didn't feel we were misrepresenting them. So everybody saw it. The company saw it before it was done, which we thought was the honorable thing to do. We had a handshake agreement on that. They saw it twice before it was done. And I think it made them uncomfortable. I think they were like, their butts were, squiggling in the chair. They didn't like it. But they also said it was fair. They had to admit all of that happened. They were not gotcha moments. They were not like, it only happened once, but we got it on camera, so we're going to put it in there. It was more like this was the way things happened at the plant from all the different levels. So no, they didn't ask us to cut out anything like that. We were surprised at that. I will say we were surprised at that. But actually, the chairman, who I admire and respect in a lot of ways, even though he's a ruthless capitalist, he is. But, there are a lot of ruthless capitalists around who we should be calling to account, which I think our film does call him to account. He threw us a big party at the plant just a couple days ago. Where there were workers, we invited a bunch of workers there. And the management folks were there, and they had investors there and all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I think I believe that if people feel they're being treated fairly, that they will embrace what you've done. They will, I just think, I have a lot of belief that people are good. That the human condition is that we all want to be good people to each other. We all want to support each other. You know, I mean, right now we're in a part of the country's history when that doesn't feel true. I think it's an aberration. That is not the America that I've mostly grown up in, right? And I think we need to change that. It's not just the guy in the White House, but it's how it affects the whole culture, right? So I hope we hold our political figures to account on these questions. So, yeah.
Julia, you spoke a lot about how you did your films, but I believe you said in the very beginning you are from Southern New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And what impact did growing up in New Jersey have on you that influenced your work once you went to Ohio?
Wow. Well, I miss the ocean and the Jersey Shore. That's one thing. I don't know if the part of the country made so much difference as like my class background and the people I grew up around. You know, I grew up around like mechanics, factory workers, you know, just very regular people. You know, my dad didn't finish 8th grade. The people he worked with at the grocery store, you know. I don't know. I think that has definitely shaped my life. It's also, I don't know, like I like making, this is maybe an admission of like something maybe I shouldn't be proud of, but I like making films with people I'm comfortable with or I feel connected to. Like the people in Lion in the House are all people dealing with childhood cancer. The people in The Last Truck in American Factory are people who live in my community, who are just regular working people like my brothers, like all the people I grew up with, you know, on and on, you know. I think that has more, the class background has more impact than New Jersey. I will say, Ohio now is more like New Jersey was then. You know, the sprawl and all that hasn't hit Ohio quite as bad as it has in New Jersey. So I love Ohio now, but I do miss the shore. I don't know if anybody's from New Jersey, but the Jersey Shore is wonderful, yeah.
I think we have time for one more.
Hi, I've been fortunate enough to actually watch some of your documentaries in my classes for college right now. And I was curious how academics has affected your films throughout your life. Because with the history changing of the focus on, especially with masculine and feminine now and more races, I want to know how that has impacted your life in general and your films.
When you say academics, how do you mean?
Like how teaching and going to college and even like your background with, you just said your dad only finished 8th grade, even that kind of impact, like how either the history that you learn or you teach, how that has impacted your films and personal.
Well, I'll tell you, one thing I loved about teaching and I miss is the continued contact with like the next generation and how what people are concerned with and how people think. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to answer that, actually. I was a college professor, which seems weird because I only have a BA and, you know, I think at my age, I've also I have a sense of how culture shifts and changes and that things aren't always going to be as bad or maybe even always as good and that we can influence that. Like I saw how my students who were at one point, like a lot of them religious right-wing people, when I first started teaching in the 80s and 90s, and then when President Obama ran for office, we suddenly had all these people who were activists for change and fighting racism and gay people coming out of the closet with Obama. So, you know, I guess I have more the long view. And it does apply to my students because I've seen what they've gone through. I remember when somebody asked me how I feel about being not a celebrity, but some kind of icon, because I'm old now and I have the little gold guy, you know, now finally. And I remember when Quentin Tarantino made Reservoir Dogs, and all my male students, which were most of my students, like wanted to make that kind of film. And with people shooting each other and being brutal to each other and cursing up a blue streak and not being cool about women. And I thought, Quentin Tarantino is like who they look up to, right? So if people are now looking up to me a little bit, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I guess that's a good ending.
That is the perfect place to leave the conversation. Julia Reichert, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you all for being here.
Oh dear. Wow.